Today I'm reading from The World Treasury of Science Fiction, edited by David G. Hartwell, and published in 1989, which makes it a year older than me. This book is made up of a lot of little science fiction stories. Some notable ones include Harrison Bergeron, A Meeting with the Medusa. Let's see what other ones on here are super. The Green Hills of Earth, which I love the Green Hills of Earth, but I'm not reading that today. 0 Hour, 9 Lives, The Public Hating, all sorts of fun stories. The science fiction story I'm reading today has a lot of really strange wording. That's just one of the reasons I decided to highlight it. It's also one of my favorites. And this is my continuing saga to learn to read aloud. By Theodore Sturgeon. The Herkle is a happy beast. The little intro put in by the editor says, Theodore Sturgeon was a master of many moods. Here he is at his most plainful, a stance he often took in public, but too rarely in his fiction. This story shows a facet of his virtuosity and is still underappreciated. This is just for fun. Laird is either in a different universal plane or in another island galaxy. Perhaps these terms mean the same thing. The fact remains that Laird is a planet with 3 moons, one of which is unknown, and a sun, which is important in its universe as it is in ours. Laird is inhabited by Gwick, its dominant race, and by several less highly developed species, which... Viktor. Are you a happy beast, Mr. Kitty? Yes. Yes. Can you stop? No. Alright, just ignore the cat in the background because he has decided that now is time for zoomies. Laird is either in a different universal plane or in another island galaxy. Perhaps these terms mean the same things. The fact remains that Laird is a planet with 3 moons, one of which is unknown, and a sun, which is as important in its universe as is ours. Laird is inhabited by Gwick, its dominant race, and by several less highly developed species which, for purposes of this narrative, can be ignored, except, of course, for the Herkle. The Herkle are highly regarded by the Gwick as pets, in spite of the fact that a Herkle is so affectionate that it can have no loyalty. The prettiest of the Herkle are blue. Now on Laird, in its greatest city, there was trouble, the nature of which does not matter to us, and a Gwick named Hav, whom you may immediately forget, blew up a building which was important for reasons we cannot understand. This event caused great excitement, and Gwick left their homes and factories and strubles and streamed toward the center of town, which is how a certain laboratory door was left open. In times of such huge confusion, the little things go on. Into the above-mentioned laboratory, which had been left open through the circumstances described, wandered a Herkle kitten. It was very happy to find itself there, but then the Herkle is a happy beast. It prowled about fearlessly. It could become invisible if frightened, and it glowed at the legs of the tables and at the glittering, racked walls. It moved sinuously, humping its back and arching along the floor. Its front and rear legs were stiff and straight as the legs of a chair. The middle pair had 2 sets of knees, one bending forward, one back. It was engineered as ingeniously as a scorpion, and it was exceedingly blue. Occupying almost a quarter of the laboratory was a huge and intricate machine, unhoused, showing the signs of development projects the galaxies over, temporary hookups from one component to another, cables terminating in spring clips, measuring devices standing about on small tables near the main work. The kitten regarded the machine with curiosity and friendly intent, sending a wave of radiations outward, which were its glow or purr. It arched daintily around to the other side, stepping delicately but firmly on a floor switch. Immediately there was a rushing, humming sound, like small birds chasing large mosquitoes, and parts of the machine began to get warm. The kitten watched curiously and saw, high up inside the clutter of coils and wires, the most entrancing muzziness it had ever seen. It was like the heat flicker over a fallow field. It was like a smoke vortex. It was like red neon lights on wet pavement. To the Herkle kitten's senses, that red-orange flicker was also like the smell of catnip to a cat or anise to a terrestrial terrier. It reared up toward the glow, hooked its forelegs over a buzz bar, fortunately there was no ground potential, and drew itself upward. It climbed from transformer to power pack, skittered up a variable condenser, the setting of which had changed thereby, disappeared momentarily as it felt the bite of a hot tube, and finally teetered on the edge of the glow. The glow hovered in midair in a sort of cabinet, which surrounded by heavy coils embodying tens of thousands of turns of small wires and great loops of bus. One side, the front, of the cabinet was open, and the kitten hung there fascinated, rocking back and forth to the rhythm of some unheard music it made to contrast this sourceless flame. Back and forth, it rocked and wove, riding a wave of delicious, compelling sensation, and once, just once, it moved its center of gravity too far from its point of support. Too far, far enough. It tumbled into the cabinet, into the flame. One muggy mid-June day, a teacher whose name was Stott and whose duties were to teach 7 subjects to 40 moppets in a very small town, was writing on a blackboard. He was writing the word Madagascar, and the air was so sticky and warm that he could feel his undershirt pasting and unpasting itself on his shoulder blade with each round A he wrote. Behind him there was a sudden rustle from the moist 7th graders. His schooled reflexes kept him from turning from the board until he had finished what he was doing, by which time the room was in a young uproar. Stout, about-faced, opened his mouth and closed it again. A thing like this would require more than a routine reprimand. His 40-odd charges were writhing and squirming in an extraordinary fashion, and the sound they made, a sort of whimpering giggle, was unique. He looked at one pupil after another. Here a hand was busily scratching a nape, there a boy was digging guiltily under his shirt, yonder a scrubbed and shining damsel violently worried her scalp. Knowing the value of an individual attack, Stott intoned, "Hubert, what seems to be the trouble?" The room immediately quieted, though diminished scramblings continued. "Nothing, Mr. Stott," quavered Hubert. Stott flicked his gaze from side to side. Wherever it rested, the scratching stopped and was replaced by agonized control. In its wake was rubbing and twitching. Stott glared, and idly thumbed a lower left rib. Someone snickered. Before he could identify the source, Stott was suddenly aware of an intense itching. He checked the impulse to go after it, knotted his jaw, and swore to himself that he wouldn't scratch as long as he was out there, front and center. "The class will," he began, tautly, and then stopped. There was a something on the sill of the open window. He blinked and looked again. It was a translucent, bluish cloud, which was almost nothing at all. It was less than a something should be, but it was indeed more than a nothing. If he stretched his imagination just a little, he might make out the outlines of an arched creature with too many legs, but of course that was ridiculous. He looked away from it and scowled at his class. He had had 2 unfortunate experiences with stink bombs, and the back of his mind was the thought of having seen once, in a trick store window, a product called itching powder. Could this be it, this terrible itch? He knew better, however, than to accuse anyone yet. If he were wrong, there was no point in giving the little geniuses any extracurricular notions. He tried again. He swallowed. This itch was... The class will... He noticed that one head, then another and another, were turning toward the window. He realized that if the class got too interested in what he thought he saw on the windowsill, he'd have a panic on his hands. He fumbled for his ruler and rapped twice on the desk. His control was not what it should have been at the moment. He struck far too hard, and the reports were like gunshots. The class turned to him as one, and behind them the thing on the windowsill appeared with great distinctness. It was blue. A truly beautiful blue. It had a small spherical head and an almost identical knob at the other end. There were 4 stiff, straight legs, a long, sinuous body, and 2 central limbs with a boneless look about them. On the side of the head were 4 pairs of eyes of graduated sizes. It teetered there for perhaps 10 seconds, and then, without a sound, leapt through the window and was gone. Mr. Stott, pale and shaking, closed his eyes. His knees trembled and weakened, and a delicate, dewy mustache of perspiration appeared on his upper lip. He clutched at the desk and forced his eyes open, and then, flooding him with relief, peeling into his terror, swinging his control back to him, the bell rang to end the class and the school day. "Dismissed," he mumbled, and sat down. The class picked up and left, changing itself from twittering pattern of rows into a rowdy kaleidoscope around the bottleneck doorway. Mr. Stott slumped down in his chair, noticing that the dreadful itch was gone, had been gone since he had made that thunderclap with the ruler. Now, Mr. Stott was a man of method. Mr. Stott, priding himself on his ability to teach his charges to use their powers of observation and all the machinery of logic at their command. Perhaps, then, he had more of both at his command after he recovered himself than could be expected of an ordinary man. He sat and stared at the open window, not seeing the sun-swept lawns outside, and after going over these events a half-dozen times, he fixed on 2 important facts. First, that the animal he had seen, or thought he had seen, had 6 legs. Second, that the animal was of such a nature as to make anyone who had not seen it believe he was out of his mind. Those 2 thoughts had their corollaries. First, that every animal he had ever seen which had 6 legs was an insect, and, second, that if anything were to be done about this fantastic creature, he had better do it by himself, and whatever action he took must be taken immediately. He imagined the windows being kept shut to keep the thing out in this heat, and he cowered away from the thought. He imagined the effect of such a monstrosity of it if it bounded into the midst of a classroom full of children in their early teens, and he recoiled. No, there could be no delay in this matter. He went to the window and examined the sill. Nothing. There was nothing to be seen outside either. He stood thoughtfully for a moment, pulling on his lower lip and thinking hard. Then he went downstairs to borrow 5 pounds of DDT powder from the janitor for an experiment. He got a wide, flat wooden box, an electrical fan, and set it up on a table he pushed close to the window. Then he sat down to wait, just in case the blue beast returned. When the Herkle kitten fell into the flame, it braced itself for a fall of at least as far as the floor of the cabinet. Its shock was tremendous then, when it found itself so braced and already resting on a surface. It looked around, panting with fright, its invisibility reflex in full operation. The cabinet was gone. The flame was gone. The laboratory with its windows, lit by the orange Litharian sky, its ranks of shining equipment, its hulking complex machine, were all gone. The Herkle kitten sprawled in an open area, a sort of lawn. No colors were right. Everything seemed half-lit, filmy, out of focus. There were trees, but not low and flat and bushy like honest Litharian trees, but with straight, naked trunks and leaves like a portal's tooth. The different atmospheric gases had colors of fading, changing, faint colors, obscured and revealed everything. The kitten twitched its camphors and rattled its kump, right there where it stood, for no amount of earthly training could overcome a shock like this. It gathered itself together and tried to move, and then it got its second shock. Instead of arching over inchworm rise, it floated into the air and came down 3 times as far as it ever had jumped in its life. It cowered on the dreamlike grass, darting glances all around, under and up. It was lonely and terrified, and felt very much put upon. It saw its shadow through the shifting haze, and the sight terrified it even more, for it had no shadow when it was frightened and alert. Everything here was all backwards and wrong way up. It got more visible instead of less when it was frightened. Its legs didn't work right, couldn't see properly, and there wasn't a single solitary malapec to be throttled anywhere. It thought it heard some music, happily, that sounded all right inside of its round head, so somehow it didn't resonate as well as it had. It tried with extreme caution to move again. This time its trajectory was shorter and more controlled. It tried a small, grounded pace and was quite successful. Then it bobbed for a moment, seesawing on its flexible middle pair of legs, and with utter abandon flung itself skyward. It went up perhaps 15 feet, turning end over end, and landing with its stiff 4 feet in the turf. It was completely delighted with this sensation. It gathered itself together, gyrating with joy, and leapt up again. This time it made more distance than altitude, and bounced 2 long, happy bounces as it landed. Its fears were gone in the exploration of this delicious new freedom of motion. The Herkle, as it has been said, is a happy beast. It curveted and sailed, soared and somersaulted, and at last brought up against a brick wall with stunning and unpleasant results. It was learning, the hard way, a distinction between weight and mass. The effect was slight but painful. It drew back and stared forlornly at the bricks. Just when it was beginning to feel friendly again, it looked upward and saw what appeared to be an opening in the wall some 8 feet above the ground. Overcome by a spirit of high adventure, it sprang upward and came to rest on the window-sill, a feat of which it was very proud. It crouched there, preening itself, and looked inside. It saw a most pleasing vista. More than 40 amusingly ugly animals, apparently imprisoned by their lower extremities in individual stalls, bowed and nodded and mumbled. At the far end of the room stood a taller, more slender monster with a naked head, naked compared to those of the trapped ones, which were covered with hair like a mouse on eggs. A few moments' study showed the kitten that, in reality, only one side of the heads was hairy. The tall one turned around and began making tracks in the end of the wall, and its head proved to be hairy on the other side too. The Herkle kitten found this vastly entertaining. It began to radiate what was, on Laert, a purr or glow. In this fantastic place it was not visible. Instead, the trapped animals began to respond with most curious writhings and squirmings and susurrant rubbings of their hides with their claws. This pleased the kitten even more, for it loved to be noticed, and redoubled the glow. The receptive motions of the animals became almost frantic. Then the tall one turned around again. It made a curious sound or two. Then it picked up a stick from the platform before it and brought it down with a horrible crash. The sudden noise frightened the Herkle kitten half out of its wit. It went invisible, but its visibility system was reversed here, and it was suddenly outstandingly evident. It turned and leapt outside, and before it reached the ground a large metallic shrilling pursued it. There were gabblings and shufflings from the room, which added force to the kitten's consuming terror. It scrambled to a low growth of shrubbery and concealed itself among the leaves. Very soon, however, its irrepressible good nature returned. It lay relaxed, watching the slight movement of the stems and leaves, some of them may have been flowers, in a slight breeze. A winged creature came humming and dancing on one of the blossoms. The kitten rested one of its middle legs, shot the other one out, and caught the creature in flight. The thing promptly jabbed the kitten's foot with a sharp black probe. This the kitten ignored. It ate the thing, and belched. It lay still for a few minutes, savoring the sensation of the bee in its chlorophyll. The experiment was suddenly not a success. It ate the bee twice more, and then gave it up as a bad job. Turned its attention again to the window, wondering what those racks of animals might be up to now. It seemed very quiet up there. Boldly the kitten came from hiding and launched itself at the window again. It was pleased with itself. It was getting quite proficient at precision leaps in this mad place. Preening itself, it balanced on the window sill and looked inside. Surprisingly, all the smaller animals were gone. The larger one was huddled behind the shelf at the end of the room. The kitten and the animal watched each other for a long moment. The animal leaned down and stuck something into the wall. Immediately there was a mechanical humming sound, and something on the platform near the window began to revolve. The next thing the kitten knew, it was enveloped in a cloud of pungent dust. It choked and became visible as it was frightened, which it was very. For a long moment it was incapable of motion. Gradually, however, it became conscious of a painfully penetrating sensation which thrilled it to the core. It gave itself up to the feeding. Wave after wave of agonized ecstasy rolled over it, and it began to dance on the waves. It glowed brilliantly, though the emanation served only to make the animal in the room scratch hysterically. The Herkle felt strained, transported. It turned and leapt high into the air, out from the building. Mr. Stott stopped scratching. Disheveled indeed, he went to the window and watched the odd sight of the blue beast, quite invisible now, but coated with dust so it was like a bubble in a fog. It bounced along the lawn in huge floating leaps, leaving behind its diminishing patches of white powder in the grass. He smacked his hand, one on the other, and smirking, withdrew to straighten up. He'd saved the earth from battle, murder, and bloodshed forever, but he did not know that. No one ever found out what he'd done, so he lived a long and happy life. And the Herkle kitten? It bounded off through the long shadows and vanished in a copse of bushes. There it dug itself a shallow pit, working drowsily more and more slowly, and at last it sank down and lay motionless, thinking strange thought, making strange music, and racked by strange sensations. Soon even its slightest movement ceased, and it stretched out stiffly, motionless, for about 2 weeks. At the end of the time, the Herkle, no longer a kitten, was possessed of a fine, healthy litter of just under 200 young. Perhaps it was the DDT, and perhaps it was the new variety of radiation that the Herkle received from the terrestrial sky. But they were all parthenogenic females, even as you and I. And the humans, oh, we breed so, and how happy we were. But the humans had the slidey itch, the scratchy itch, and the prickly or tingly or titillative paraesthetic formication, and there wasn't a thing they could do about it. So they left. Isn't this a lovely place? This is so hard to read. Oh my god. I love this story, but it's so many words. It's like if Dr. Seuss decided to write science fiction, and my tongue hurts. So now you know the secret of all itchiness. It's because of Herkle kittens that are making us itchy, because they're happy and we look stupid to them. And this is the best thing ever. I love this story so much. All right. Thank you and have a good day.